All right, everybody. I'm going to start off by introducing myself here. Do I click to get the slide started? Yeah. All right. So my name is Tony Besel. I know it's not spelled traditionally, but it was like that since I was born. So nice to meet you guys. And I'm a security engineer at Cisco. My job is to automate solutions for customers to help them reduce their risk and complexity. Today, I want to share with you a couple of techniques that I use to help customers perform this automation. So let's get started. First, we're going to do some quick housekeeping. I'm going to introduce you guys to threat hunting, which is why we're all here, right? Then we're going to talk about security automation, how it works and how we can use it. And finally, we're going to play a little game and have a little adventure. We'll finish up with some use cases. By a show of hands, how many people here have a definition of threat hunting in your organization? Most people should have their hands up. Now, how many of us have the same definition? All right. Well, the theme that you might notice in most of these definitions is that we're trying to find adversaries that have found a way to bypass our security controls. They're already in our networks. It happens. I know, it happens to every customer. But the important thing that we need to focus on is, why do we hunt? We spend a ton of money every year to deploy security tools. Depending on which article that you read, the estimated cybersecurity market is between $300 and $500 billion. We spend this money on tools, agents, and other solutions to help us defend our networks and prevent data breaches, but they still find a way in. At the same time, we hear about a skills shortage and the inability to find professionals. Regardless of this gap, it's still the DFIR community that has to triage, investigate, and respond to these alerts. And we all know that time is money, right? So the longer that we're investigating, the more money we're losing. The longer that adversaries are in the network, the more money that they're making. However, the inverse is also true. If we can reduce that time for investigation, that's less money that we'll be losing in breaches and less money that the adversaries will make. And when we hunt, what do we hunt for? Let's start with the simplest one, which is an indicator-based driven hunt. This is where you take IOCs, such as IPs, hashes, and domains, and you check for them in your environment. This is certainly something easy that we can perform, but it's also easy for adversaries to modify. A small little change in a tool that they use will change the hash value. We also have heard about the pyramid of pain, and we understand that adversaries can change things like they're in their infrastructure, such as domains or IP addresses. So a more advanced type of detection is TTP, or tactics, techniques, and procedures. This is more behind the how the adversaries are performing their actions instead of what they're using. For this type of investigation, we want to perform a systematic approach. This is also useful to discover tools that are in your environment that shouldn't be there. We saw a discussion a few moments ago about TeamViewer. Should you have that in your environment? Some other examples of things we look for in TTP-driven hunting is the use of things like weaponized PDFs or fast-flux domain number. And finally, the most advanced type of a threat hunt is an anomaly-driven hunt. This is where you collect your information and you create a baseline. Many times we're going to be including things like machine learning to create a behavioral analytics and alert you when things have been deviated. Today, I'd like to focus on intelligence-driven threat hunts. A lot of our time is spent on looking at our internal collection, our tools, our firewall rules, and things that we have deployed. We spend a lot of this time reviewing these alerts and making sure that they're true positives. And we want to try to eliminate the false positive as much as possible. And how do we do that? Well, we usually incorporate some type of threat intelligence. Threat intelligence is an essential part to every threat hunting program. Now, I want to take a moment and talk about threat intelligence. The most important information that you can collect and store on threat intelligence is your previous intrusions. This is the most relevant information because adversaries that were already in your network will usually try to find a way back in. And if you knew how to remove them the first time, this is the most important way to understand how to remove them next time. Then we also need to talk about threat feed. Everybody out in that hall right now will try to sell you a threat feed. but not every threat feed applies to all data sets. Make sure you're applying the appropriate threat feed to your data set. And finally, it's open source intelligence. Places that you find like blogs, like Cisco Talos, or Twitter. There's lots of good use for information out there, but be careful because sometimes this information is outdated, and again, it may not apply to your environment. Using this information, we can cross-reference the data and determine the proper course of action. This takes up the biggest portion of our time to determine what should we be doing. Should we respond to the malware? Should we be isolating the host, etc.? The quicker that we can get to a course of action, the quicker that we can get the adversaries out of our environment. Luckily, this portion can be automated. We can reduce a large overhead in our security operations center. Not every single organization hunts the same. When organizations start threat hunting, they usually start by using the tools that they have deployed, whether it's EDR or SIM solutions. But they'll quickly add threat intelligence to try to enrich that information. As organizations begin to mature, you'll see that they start to document routine procedures. And our most leading and most innovative organizations have identified their analytic techniques and are automating the majority of these procedures. This is the hunting maturity model is a reference to the Squirrel Networks, which is now part of Amazon. And if you visit the QR code in the corner, you can read more about it. All right, now that we've had that baseline, let's understand how security analytics, security automation can help us out. We spend a lot of time using tools and scripting languages to help us build solutions for our teams. I myself have built many projects that have helped my organizations perform their actions quickly. While these are great solutions, they all come with their own risks. I'm sure that some of us, myself included, have an entire project running on a single box sitting underneath my desk. That's a huge risk in our environment. But you might say, hey, Tony, we don't do that. We have our stuff deployed in data centers, right? We have our stuff deployed in the cloud. Well, that's my point, though. We're too busy focused on coding and maintaining infrastructure when our job is incident management and forensics. Not to mention that when individuals are maintaining our tools for us and it's not something that we're sharing, it creates a pocket of knowledge that certain individuals might, that they have that others don't. This is a huge risk to your organization because when these individuals move on, for whatever reason, they take that knowledge with them, and this can seriously impact your environment. You also have to consider the secrets that you're using, your tokens and other things. How are you using them? Where are they stored? How are you accessing them? Are they encrypted at rest? You also have to understand if the credentials that you're using, are they shared? Does everybody in your SOC use the same login, for example? And let's talk briefly about rollback access control. Many times developers will remove the burden to their solutions by checking every box and creating an API client, for example, that has all the permissions. While this might be a good solution, not a best practice, but it might be a solution for developers, many times this leaks into production. So are you guys monitoring for these kind of risks? And also, have you thought about rotating your keys? How often do you do it? And do you have a process to revoke those keys if they're compromised while in production? And supply chain risk, especially through libraries and dependencies, is a huge risk when using open source tooling. Many of us have heard about vulnerable dependencies that have been discovered. Even in February, there was 25 or so vulnerabilities discovered in the official NPM repo for JavaScript. But that's not the only one. I was reading that even the package manager for Python, pip, even has multiple vulnerabilities in it. And let's not forget about log4j. We're still having trouble from that. There was a remote code execution vulnerability that's been in that since 2016. This is a major gap and major risk in our assessments. Most of this, all of this is wrapped around a specialized skill set, which is DevSecOps, which is different than digital forensics and incident response. These analysts know how to do rapid risk assessments, code reviews, and build secure pipelines like we saw in the previous talk. Now, these skills are great, and we want to advance our operations teams. However, this costs time and money. Or you could hire new staff, but that costs even more time and even more money. What I'm saying is that it's dangerous to automate threat hunting. Luckily, you're not alone. There are new and exciting tools that are available to you to help us automate this and reduce the risk, and in some cases, transfer the risks to other solutions. For example, Towne and Torque are new players in the industry that do no to low code solutions. This will help you build workflows to automate your solution. The Hive is also great with some built-in automation, but it has a case management built into it, which is essential for your security operations team to document what they're doing and to communicate. Now, if you're going to use something like Python, make sure you're using Jupyter Notebooks, which allows you to provide notes, documentation, and even graphics, so that way you can share your intentions and the reasons for your tooling with everyone in the Security Operations Center. And we should all be familiar with Maltego. If not, let me tell you real quick. This is a great tool to help you enrich information by using what they call transforms. This is where you provide a single bit of information, like an IP, and it'll regress and determine all the relevant information. For example, from an IP address, you can get a domain name. That domain name has SSL certificates. Those SSL certificates are used on other domains, on other IPs. Even though you might discover a single piece of information, using an enrichment tool like Maltego will help you map out the adversary's infrastructure, which is super useful for your hunts, because if they've performed a phone home or command and control to one IP, chances are they're using other infrastructure as well. If you visit that QR code in the corner, it'll take you to the GitHub repo for Awesome Store, where there's a list of multiple tools that I have listed here, as well as commercial tools, like Cisco's secure orchestration. Great, now that we know how the game is played, let's go ahead and get started. I'm gonna give to you guys a simple 3-step process I use to automate most everything. And the first thing is most important is to document your procedures. This is an essential element. And as we saw in the maturity model, as organizations mature, they begin to identify their routine tasks. Next, we need to visualize our data flow. And what I mean by that is we need to see where our data is coming from and where it's going. We need to identify our inputs and outputs. And for this, I'm going to use a flowchart. And last, you need to determine your workflow categories. This is essential so that way you can identify what actions are occurring inside of your workflow, and you can swap out the underlying technology while maintaining the structure of what you're performing. Let's get started. All right, work with me here. Theoretically, some researcher out there just found some really choice cobalt strike, and they want to tweet about it. So they post about it on the C2 on their favorite social media. Now, our Security Operations Center is tasked with monitoring this social media and determining if there's any observables that are available. When an observable is found, our security analysts will enrich that data using their threat intelligence. They're looking for things like malicious ratings or high threat scores that could indicate trouble. They then search their events and logs to see if there's any connections. And if there are, they'll raise a ticket documenting the timestamps, the host information, and that enriched observable information. We'll then escalate to our Security Operations Center by posting the ticket into our chat room so our senior analysts can pick it up, perform an investigation, and determine that course of action. All right, well, let's see what that looks like. If you think about what we're doing here, is we're taking from Twitter and pulling out any things that look like observables, IPs and hashes. But many times we'll defang these by putting special characters in there. That prevents users such as myself from clicking on it and visiting the malware or going to the phone C2. After we've determined that there are valid observables, then we're going to have to enrich it. So at this point, we've gone from a tweet to an observable to enriched. Now, depending on the threat rating, we'll take our enriched observable and go check our logs and events. And in the presence that there is a detection, we'll take the enriched observable and the logs and events and create a ticket. Now, the ticket itself even becomes an output for our chat ops. Why am I talking so much about inputs and outputs? One of the core principles of cybersecurity is a feedback loop, and the feedback loop goes back to the human. And all the automation that's occurring needs to make sure that we're keeping the humans involved. In this case, I'm using chat ops to notify our operations team that a new tweet has just been detected that is malicious, and on top of that, we've seen multiple sightings in our environment. Quickly getting to a course of action like isolating a host might be a need. All right, now, in my line of business, I've worked with lots of customers. And in the process, I've come up with a couple of high-level categories. Now, these categories are not exclusive, meaning that your categories are probably different than mine. And the workflow might actually belong to one or multiple categories. Let's go ahead and take each of these in order. First of all is the hunt category. This is essential for identifying hidden threats in your environment. For example, an IP address that matches a hash. This is great for finding those hidden threats in your environment, and I use this one a lot. Second of all is the correlate category. This is useful when you have more than one asset, especially in this remote world where we're working not in the office. You might have more than one device. In fact, I have a work laptop that's assigned to me, but I also have a desktop back at home. I also have a phone that I use for work. If my password was compromised and I had to reset my password or my phone gets lost, as a security analyst, you need to know how wide your exposure is. So that's a really great category. Next is the track category. This category I like to use to find threats that go under the radar. For example, if I had a failed login attempt, I typed in my password wrong, sure. But if that failed login attempt has been occurring every single day for the last 30 days and on nights and weekends, you might have yourself a brute force attempt that you just aren't seeing. Next is the document and notify categories. This is the ways that we keep our humans involved. It's our feedback loop. First is the document category. With this category, we document our findings and our investigations as we're progressing, such as creating tickets or putting enriched information into our casebooks. But don't forget notify. Notify is separate because it lets the user know that some action occurred, whether automation occurred or you need to push an approval. Have you guys ever seen duo pushes? That's a notification that you're trying to log in. That's that feedback loop I'm talking about again. And last is the response category. This is a category that's useful for any actions that are complicated or prone to human error. Things that I use response categories for are like isolating a host, moving a server to a new VLAN, or updating Cisco Umbrella for blocking DNS command and controls. I've also heard other talks where people were saying that certain actions are reoccurring and it's overly complicated, they don't want to have errors. The respond category would be perfect for you in that case. Great. So in our adventure, how do our analysts, or how do our security engineers perform threat hunting? Well, let's check some of this strange magic in play. All right, so it's our good friend Twitter. I'm going to show you this example because it helps us, security analysts use Twitter to post information to share with the community. I'm going to be looking at the OpenDIR hashtag. For those of you that don't know, it's used by a dozen or so researchers to post fresh indicators of compromise in their environment. By following this hashtag, you're able to get these indicators as soon as they post them and check for them in your environment. But OpenDIR isn't the only one. For example, if you're worried about spam, the Emotet hashtag has a lot of good information. And there's an @ColdVaultStrike user, which puts out great information. Now, understanding the format in these is important because not every time, not every post is going to have an indicator in it. For example, sometimes they push off to like Pastebin or something like that, okay? So find the things that work for you. Let's take a look at this. This is what I call a retro hunt. This is to go back through your information and determine if anywhere in your environment you see prevalence of information. This is how we uncover hidden enemies. So in this case, we're going to take the tweets from OpenDIR and parse them like I was telling you here. Next, we're going to send this information to our endpoint solution tool. At Cisco, we have a secure endpoint tool which runs a fork of OS query, and that allows us to actually assess the environment in live time. Lots of these endpoint tools that you assess in live time have a slight delay. So in this case, after we wait for the information to come back, we're going to check to see if our endpoint tool has discovered anything. In the event that there is a discovery, we're going to document this in a ticket and escalate to our senior security staff using Slack in this example. However, if there was no sighting occurred, we're not just going to throw this indicator away. In this workflow, I update a watch list in my endpoint tool to alert us automatically in the event that one of our endpoints do make a connection to one of these indicators. And again, I'm posting that information to Slack, so we're keeping our feedback alive. Isn't that cool? All right. Well, I think that workflow is pretty, let's go back so we could talk about it. This workflow has a couple of categories. Let's talk about that. We have the hunt category that we're using. We also have the document and the notify categories. What I like about this workflow is that it's flexible and it saves time. And more importantly, it's not running underneath my desk anymore. All right, now I'll go on to the next one. I want to show you how you can reduce your alert fatigue. I don't know how many times I've looked at an alert and review a firewall and determined that it's just the source IP from a security researcher that's just investigating a new vulnerability, but they don't have any real malicious intent. And for that matter, how do you determine an intent, especially on the internet? Well, I'd like to introduce you guys to gray noise. If you don't know about it already, it's a great tool. The UI is free, and so I'm showing you this here. Gray noise is a sensor network that collects scans against internet-facing IPs. It then analyzes this information and provides context in the form of tags and labels. These labels include things such as PHP invoke function, or Confluence scan, or Hadoop yarn worm. They also have tags for malicious, or unknown, or benign. Gray noise also contains two separate databases that they can label, Riot and Noise. The Riot database is an acronym, and it stands for Rule It Out. And this is for legitimate businesses that you can ignore, such as Google's DNS or Cloudflare's DNS. Where the noise category is used for scanners that you can ignore, such as Shodan and Census. While we should certainly block these categories, we don't need to spend much time on it. Let's go see how we can use gray noise in a workflow. In this workflow, I'm going to show you how to reduce your alert fatigue by removing false positives and at the same time reduce the investigation required for your analyst. Let's begin. This workflow is configured to run every hour, and it pulls the last hour's worth of tickets. It then filters those tickets down to just the alerts that have firewall information in it, and it pulls out the IP addresses. We then take those IP addresses and submit them to Gray Noise on their Quick API. I'm using the Quick API because it'll let you know if the host is on the Riot or the Noise database, or if it isn't found on either of those. If an IP address is found on either of these databases, we want to call the Gray Noise Context API and pull in as much information as we can. We then update the ticket that we just pulled and notify our Security Operations Center that this ticket is no longer needed. In fact, in this workflow, I have actually marked the ticket to close itself, and then we're letting our team know that it's been completed. However, in the event that it's not on the Riot or the Noise database, then we're going to want to get the context as well as all the tags that Gray Noise has collected on this IP. We then combine that information, update our ticket, and notify our operations center. Unless there's a malicious tag, then we go down the third path right there, where we update the tag, but then assign this ticket to our senior security staff. And then we notify them that of the investigation and the need to respond. Isn't that cool? This workflow contains the hunt as well as an aggregate, I would have called it combined category. It also contains the document and notify. I like this workflow because it'll help you reduce the amount of time your investigators need to get the context, right? And then it also helps you not have to worry about tickets that I spend so much time on to find out that I can close them. So this is really, really powerful, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. Well, I think this little Bobby comic sums up our talk quite well, because even if we are trying to automate threat hunting, we got to remember to keep the humans involved. Look, I'm not trying to advocate to replace anybody's job around here. In fact, security automation isn't trying to take anybody's job away. It's trying to help you do the more fun things. Because if we took away all the boring stuff, like looking at Twitter all day, you wouldn't be out of a job, right? Plus, your boss doesn't want you looking at Twitter all day. Come on. All right. So, in conclusion, I'll just leave you with a couple of points here. Threat hunting is about finding those adversaries that are in your network that have already bypassed your controls. While threat intelligence will help you enrich this information and get to the point that you can determine a course of action as quick as possible. And security automation is a great way, and there's lots of tools out there to help you reduce that risk and the complexity to tie it all together. Look, I do this all day using that 3-step process I just showed you. And I love it when customers come to me and say, Tony, you've saved me time, or I don't have to look at this category of tickets anymore. I hope that this example and these steps that I've given you will help you in your organizations. And I'm open to talking to anybody if they have any questions. You can reach me at GitHub. I've got LinkedIn, and then I'm crazy. I guess I put my personal email on there. But yeah, thank you guys for coming out.